Welcome to another episode of Commending and Contending. It's a podcast about how the gospel of Jesus encourages us to live our lives and use our words to commend and contend for Jesus and his gospel. I'm your host, Jonathan Holt. Joining me today is David Shaw. G'day, David.
Jonathan, good to see you.
Where has God planted you, David?
So right now I'm in the great city of Perth, the very isolated city of Perth, at Perth Bible College. So that's my Monday to Friday, and that's where the bulk of my ministry takes place. On the weekends, my wife, my children, together we attend Providence Church in the city. So listeners might be aware that Rory Shiner, who is the current president, I think, of TGCA.
TGCA, yep.
Yeah, I have the privilege of calling him my pastor and friend. So that's life for us here in Perth.
And how has God been encouraging you recently?
So in terms of church life, Prov has been really blessed to see ridiculous growth, frankly. And I don't think it's, it's not something that was ever planned, I don't think, by the staff. But we've doubled our numbers in a couple of years. And it's been a real blessing to see people coming to faith. We're seeing baptisms every school term. We are seeing people investigating the faith. We are seeing people coming because they want good doctrine. And sadly, for whatever reason, they weren't getting it where they were before. That was never part of the plan. I don't think at Prov. And I'm talking about it like I'm a bit of an insider. I was on staff at Prov for 3 years recently before returning to Perth Bible College. So I saw some of the ins and outs of all that, and it was incredibly encouraging. We were just trying to keep up. It was like it felt a little bit like the Lord had a Ferrari and he was towing us along in this smashed up Volkswagen Beetle, and we were just clinging on for dear life. But that's been really great. In terms of Perth Bible College, we had our biggest intake ever this year. We're seeing a lot of growth in students looking to do Christian counseling. I want to see more ministry students, frankly. It would be great to see those numbers pick up a little bit. But we've got a ton of people who love the Lord, who want to serve his people really well, love his people really well. So that's been huge. That's been really encouraging. So we're seeing growth across the board. And that's wonderful. Yeah.
Earlier this year, our church was working through 1 Peter in our Bible talks on Sunday, and It was really interesting to see the way that Peter calls on disciples to live good lives among the pagans, where they are, where they're living. And it strikes me that Peter's first letter is quite a remarkable resource when it comes to commending the gospel in our lives and in our words. You've done a bunch of work on 1 Peter. What do you think it is about 1 Peter? What's in there that makes it so useful for us when we think about commending Jesus in our lives?
Oh, where to begin? Where to begin? 1 Peter. It's such a rich resource, an underutilized resource, I think. There's nothing wrong with the Gospels, obviously. There's nothing wrong with Paul for this sort of stuff. Peter seems to be somewhat neglected, but I think it's about as timely as a letter as one can imagine. The reason I think it's so helpful is that it leans into this identity that I'd refer to as something along the lines of elect sojourners, people who are called of God, and that word is really critical for Peter, this idea of calling and being a people called. and a people who recognize that this world is not their home, that because of their faith in Jesus, that faith renders them outsiders in the places that they once called home, and they then have to figure out what life looks like, navigating what was home, but now as those who are outsiders. And so they may look the same, they may eat the same, they may dress the same and talk the same. Lots of external features do not change. But because of their faith, they are different. And in 1 Peter's context, there is antagonism towards people who love and live for Jesus. And they're having to figure out on the fly what it looks like to be faithful witnesses in very difficult circumstances. And for that reason, I think Peter is a vital resource in that regard.
And so he's talking about calling, being called. Just kind of tease out for us a bit. What is it? What is Peter getting at when he tells us we're called?
Yeah, so oftentimes I think in modern nomenclature, we think of calling as, oh, I'm called to do this, I'm called to do that. I'm called to be a teacher, I'm called to be a nurse, I'm called to be, you fill in the blank. That calling, that sense of vocation. In 1 Peter, calling language is identity language, it is salvation language, but it's also commissioning language. So it's doing a lot of heavy lifting in the letter. Early in 1 Peter, chapter 1, verses 15 and 16, Peter talks about being called to be holy, like the Holy One who called you, drawing on Leviticus, chapter 19. A little bit later on, Peter talks about God's people being called out of darkness into his marvelous light. That's salvation language. He talks about you're a chosen race or family, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of the one who called you, the one who saved you, the one who gave you new life. So that's your sort of salvation-y language there. But then as the letter proceeds, out of that, the first half I would call identity formation, up to chapter 2, verse 10, give or take. After that, it's about working out that identity. And so in chapter 2, verses 18 through 25, you have the household code. Peter's talking to slaves and wives and husbands. And in the midst of that, he says, for to this you were called. And it's in relation to following the Lord Jesus in suffering for your faith. And slaves, incredibly, to be honest, slaves are held up as the paradigm for the entire church. It's the only place in antiquity that I'm aware of where slaves are held up as models or examples for the whole community to follow. And it's in the endurance of suffering. The reason Peter puts the slaves first is because although the whole church is suffering in their respective context, it's the slaves who feel that most acutely in the everydayness of their life. And so they embody, as it were, the suffering servant, Jesus. That the churches have living, breathing models in the flesh who know firsthand what it's like to suffer like Jesus. And so they're offered as models for the whole church. And then just after that, in chapter 3, just after Peter has spoken to husbands, he says, for to this you were called, bless, that you may obtain a blessing. And so the idea there being that you are not only called to endure suffering graciously, you are called to bless the very ones who are the cause of your suffering. Sort of taking on the idea of Jesus saying, turn the other cheek. In this instance, Peter would say, you go even a sense in which you go a step further than that. Love your enemies, bless your, bless your enemies. Like Jesus drawing on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. You have heard it said, hate your enemies and love your brothers, but no, you're going to love your enemies. In fact, you're going to be a blessing. You're going to seek their peace, their shalom, their holistic well-being. And that's a game changer. It's the last thing I think you would expect. And so that's huge. And then towards the end of the letter, there's one final calling where Peter talks about being called to eternal glory. That's salvation language again. So having been called to be a particular kind of people and to live out a particular way of life in the Lord, the end game is eternal life, the new heavens and the new earth, resurrection bodies, and that being the reward for living out your calling in that regard.
So we have this calling, not only to be a particular kind of people, but to live in a particular kind of way. And the commending work Peter's talking about, if I've understood you rightly, is this work of blessing, that you would bless the people around you.
Yeah.
What does that look like exactly? How do I know if I'm doing that? Could I be doing it already and just not realize it? Or is there something I need to be doing to work on to really show blessing in the midst of the kind of crazy pagan world I have to live in?
Okay, so blessing in First Peter, I think three aspects stand out to me that Peter writes in quite short order between chapter 3, verses 8 through 17. The first one is blessing as non-retaliation. So in a strange way, it's not so much about what you do, but about what you don't do. It's, in a sense, a negative command. So Peter draws on the life and example of Jesus. And so just as when Jesus was crucified, he did not slander when other people slandered him on the cross, and he was reviled, he did not revile in return. The same command holds true for Peter's readership, for those to whom he writes in ancient Turkey, that although they are bearing the consequences of coming to the faith, and they are relatively fresh in the faith, there was no social capital to be gained by coming to the faith. Peter says, don't retaliate. That blessing is, I think the way I put it in my book is, it's the active absorption of evil. And that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And one of the authors I found most helpful in understanding that was actually Miroslav Volf. In his book, Exclusion and Embrace, he talks about life and war in the Balkans. And what he came to realize was that if you don't believe in a God who will judge evil, then your only chance for justice is in this life.
Yeah.
And so it's the belief in a God who will right all wrongs that actually enables someone to turn the other cheek and to actively absorb that evil and not repay it in kind. So that's the first act of blessing. The second act of blessing is seeking peace.
Yeah.
And this is where Peter draws upon Psalm 34. In the Greek version of the Old Testament, it's Psalm 33. In the English Bibles, it's Psalm 34. And Psalm 34 in particular draws on, it's a psalm that's written looking back on the life of David when he is on the run from Saul. And so if you go back to that narrative in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Samuel primarily, David's running for his life. He has been promised the crown. He's the next anointed king. And yet he has to flee the land that he will one day rule. And during that time, he has to live faithfully between the promise of the crown and the inheritance of that crown. And he has the opportunity on numerous occasions to take Saul's life. And he chooses not to. He refuses to retaliate. He could have easily. And certainly in an ancient context such as David's, that would have actually been par for the course. But he chooses not to retaliate. And more than that, he seeks peace with Saul. and Saul, he's doing his men's business in a cave, and David sneaks in and cuts off a portion of his robe and says, "I could have taken you out, but I didn't. I want peace. Far be it from me to slay the Lord's anointed." And so the way that Psalm quotation wraps up for Peter, he says that the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. And many readers of First Peter look at that section and go, "Oh, that's a warning to the non-believers." But I think in the context, it has to be taken as a warning to believers who, although tempted to pursue evil in response to suffering and acrimony and that sort of thing, like Peter's saying, no, the Lord's eyes are on the righteous. Don't think that you will inherit a blessing if you neglect your priestly calling, which is to bless and to represent the Lord to the nations and the nations to the Lord. So seek peace and pursue it in the same way that an embassy seeks good relations with its host nation. So too you seek peace and good relations with those around you. And then the third act of blessing, as it were, is to actually share the hope of your faith, the hope that you have with regards to your faith. So it's hard to tell in the context whether or not Peter has formal court scenes in mind or whether it's in the everydayness of life. I don't think it matters. Christians are always, to extend that court metaphor, we are always on the stand. We're always in the dock. People are always judging us, and we are called to bear witness. And the way Peter says it is to do so with to do it with respect and with gentleness. So don't retaliate. Seek the holistic well-being of those who cause your suffering. And then when they say, "Hey, that's really weird. Why are you seeking my best interests when I'm making your life miserable?" Be prepared to have an answer and give a reason for the hope within you, and do it with gentleness and respect. And I think that's much needed today. There's a lot of bluster online, and some people want to maybe represent the Lord with a sledgehammer. I think Peter's looking for something a little bit more subtle, a little bit more articulate. And in some corners of the internet, winsomeness has become a dirty word. I think Peter would have something to say to that. And that's actually the third, for mine at least, as I read the text, that's the third act of blessing. So,
And so God's kind of covenant promise from the very beginning is to bless the nations, to bring about that good that he has in mind for them. And I love that you've kind of pointed out for us there, not only is it about what we don't do, the non-retaliation, that we completely trust God to be a God of justice who will judge. That actually sets us free from pursuing my own personal justice right now.
Yes.
I lay that aside for a moment so that I can seek the good of others. I'm not kind of caught up in myself so much, but I am caught up in my hope, because I have this confident hope of God's justice and salvation and the full inheritance of what I hope for.
Yeah, that's right.
A day is coming when that will be set right. And I think it is challenging, though, because Peter gives us this sense that the pagans will see our good deeds, but their glorifying of God may only happen on the day he visits us. And so in lots of ways, I think your embassy image is probably a really helpful one there. That is, we think of ourselves as an embassy of the kingdom of God in the place we've put. We're not buying into the culture around us completely. We don't have to look like everyone around us. Our embassy can have its distinctive architecture and distinctive practices and so forth. But we do want to commend the beauty and goodness of that identity we have as chosen people, the holy race, the royal priesthood.
Yes, yeah, and I take your point as well that there's a sense in which you'd expect the embassy to be different. That it shouldn't be that it shouldn't be identical to the host nation. Maybe you expect points of contact, otherwise relations cannot take place. communication has to be given and understood for communication to be communication. But it can't sell its soul. It has to. Its fundamental allegiance is to the home nation, to the kingdom, and so it should be when someone comes and visits, it should be a little taste of on earth as it is in heaven. That's the goal. We do it imperfectly, to be fair, but I'm pretty convinced that the idea is that when someone visits church for the first time, it should be a little taste of the kingdom. And if it looks just like everywhere else, then, well, I think something may have gone awry.
David, you've written some articles on the Gospel Coalition Australia website that kind of flesh out some of these themes that emerge from your book. I reckon what we might do is pop a couple of those in the show notes for people to follow up on, just to explore this a bit more and think through this issue. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jonathan. Really enjoyed it.